Time to revisit the mother sauces, this time with bechamel. Next on Urban Kitchen Revolution. I'm Chef James Hudson. Today we're going to put one of the mother sauces in our cap. Today we're going to be dealing with bechamel. We've already dealt with hollandaise in the past episode. Today is bechamel sauce. Bechamel sauce, like the other mother sauces, isn't necessarily that important of a sauce in and of itself. It's what you do with the derivatives. With bechamel sauce, really all we're doing is we're making a thickened cream sauce that will eventually lead into things like cheese sauces and mornayes, or for pasta dishes, for cream sauces, or even for like killer nacho cheese sauce or queso fundo for chips and salsa. So let's get rolling right into this, shall we? The first step to making a bechamel sauce, which is really nothing more than whole milk and then the addition of roux. Roux, which we're going to be visiting over and over again in this series, is a classic French technique for thickening sauces. And really all roux is an equal mixture of butter and flour. So to make a roux, really all we're going to do is we're going to take the butter here and we're going to add it to our cast iron skillet. We're going to put that on the stove and add an equal part of flour. Now I like to weigh my fat and not my flour, so that I can get the correct consistency. The consistency of the roux itself, which we'll see on the stove, is actually more important than the actual measurement, because it's going to vary depending upon what kind of roux you want. So without any further ado, let's jump over to the stove and get this rolling, and then we'll get the milk heating up. Okay, so we're back, and we have our butter melted in our cast iron skillet. Like I said, 4 ounces or 115 grams. And it's just starting to bubble. We want to start adding the flour before it starts to brown, obviously. So we're just going to add a little bit of a time here and kind of stir it around. And what we're going to be looking for is a paste that will separate from the pan after you move through it like that. It'll completely separate and go to 2 sides. So as you can see, we're not quite there, but I'm still continuing to stir in order to remove any clumps. If you wanted to use like a very fine flour, like a Wondra, you absolutely can. If you want to sift the flour, you can do that too. I don't, many books will tell you to do that, many people will tell you to do that. I don't really find it all that horribly necessary, as long as you're diligent about continuing to stir as you are heating it up. So what we're going to be looking for, we are almost there, as you can see that last time. I think this is going to be just about it. So you can see how that is completely moving away from the pan. It still has a little bit of a glossy sheen to it, but is, like I said, separating from the pan. I'm going to add just a tiny, tiny bit more flour, because as this cooks, it will lose some of its starch during the cooking process. And that is a perfect segue into the cooking process, actually. With roux, it is very important that you cook the flour out. Otherwise, your sauce is going to taste like wallpaper paste. Now, you can cook it on the stovetop if you want, of course. Personally, I prefer to set it in a 350-degree oven and let it cook inside there, because it will allow for the cooking of the flour to take place from all sides, just removing it every 5 or 10 minutes or so to give it a good stir. And you get a nice, evenly cooked roux that way. On top of the stove, especially if you turn the heat up past medium, you have a tendency to have very, very cooked parts of the roux and also raw parts of the roux, even if you continue to stir. So what we're going for today is a blonde roux. There are several different colors of roux. like I said, because we're doing a cream sauce, we want it nice and light. We want a nice light colored roux. If we were doing something like a Creole etouffee or a gumbo, we'd want a nice deep dark roux, which would also give a really nutty nuance to the finished sauce itself. But we'll get into an etouffee later on down the line. So as you can see, it's starting to cook, it's starting to bubble a little bit. The consistency is good. You see how when you scrape it away from the pan, it kind of holds its shape and just slowly forms back down again. I'm gonna take this out and put this in the oven. And like I said, we're gonna just let it cook for probably about 20 minutes or so until we get a nice light tan, almost brown color, and it starts to have a smell of like hazelnuts. But while that's going, we're going to go ahead and move our other pot over, and we're going to start to work on the milk itself. Let's turn that off and move over to here. For the milk, since we have about 8 ounces or 130 grams of roux total, we have about 1 quart or 1 liter of milk. For a sauce with roux, you're looking at about 20% of roux weight to your liquid. So later on in the world, when we get into other sauces that use roux, we'll be using about the same ratio of roux to milk. This is whole milk. I highly recommend you use whole milk, not mess around with 2% or especially not skim. I've never actually tried it with soy or almond milk, but there's no real reason why it wouldn't work, but also no real reason in my world why you would want, of course, unless you're lactose intolerant. If anybody out there has ever used soy or almond milk or any other non-dairy milk substitute for something like this, let me know and I'll pass the info on. So all we're going to do with this to begin with is we have the heat on medium, because you have to be very, very careful not to scorch the milk during the process. So I'm just going to put 3 or 4 pinches of salt in here, a couple of cracks of pepper, and finally a couple of scrapes of whole nutmeg. And that's it. Basically, all we're going to do now is give it a quick little stir. We're going to cover this so that it will come up to temperature faster. Like I said, we have it on medium heat. We just want to come back to this maybe every 3 or 4 minutes, give it another quick stir to keep the bottom from scorching while we're waiting for our roux to cook. So while we're doing this, we'll come back in about 15-20 minutes and finish this sauce up. Okay, so back about 15 minutes later, we have the milk starting to come to a nice simmer with the lid on. We keep the lid on so that we only have to use like medium heat, so we reduce the chances of scorching the bottom of the pan. We've been stirring about every 2 or 3 minutes here, about every 5 or 6 for the roux, which is coming out of the oven right now. And there it is, nice and golden brown, just like we talked about, fully cooked. If you could smell it, it would have this light essence of like roasted nuts. And we're going to add this in small stages to the milk itself. We want to do this like maybe a third, a third, a third. Now when we add this first batch, it's going to bubble up the milk because this is obviously much, much higher or much, much hotter. You see how that went? Then the milk. This is 300 degrees. This is only 200 degrees. I'm going to stir it in real well. Add another. This is called tempering it in. This will help to avoid clumps in your sauce. Thoroughly incorporate it, obviously with a nice, clean, dry kitchen rag to help you along. And one last time. And you can already see the consistency completely start to change. It's getting nice and viscous. I'm going to take this off the heat real quick, maybe to get rid of some of that steam. You can see how it's actually formed a little bit, almost a paste-like consistency, but still has, and we're just going to turn this on to super low heat, as low as your stove will go, and we're just going to let this lightly cook for about another 5 minutes or so to kind of what we call cooking out. It's basically going to continue to cook that pasty taste of the flour out of the sauce itself. In a perfect world, you would cook this for about 5 minutes, let it set to the side to kind of cool off, add a little bit of milk to it to kind of help to re-temper the sauce, and then bring it back up again, and then you'd have a fully developed sauce. And that is pretty much bechamel sauce. We'll go back over to the other side, give it a taste, and that's about it. Okay, so we're back. Bechamel sauce is finished. As you can see, it's got a nice, it's a little thick. If it's a little over thick, you can always add a little bit of milk to it. Not a problem at all, but it's got a nice creamy consistency. The flour is completely cooked out of it. It's not horribly flavorful. This could have a little bit more salt in it. But again, this is going to become a base for a whole bunch of other things that we're going to do in future episodes. So I'm just going to leave it nice and neutral. So that's really it, bechamel sauce. The only thing you really need to remember to do, don't scorch your milk. Cook your roux to a nice light blonde consistency. Adjust final texture with some extra milk, or let it reduce a little bit more. And that's really it. Two of the mother sauces under our belts, ready to go on to bigger and better things. So I'd like to thank you for continuing to watch and join me on this adventure. Again, you can follow me on the web at urbankitchenrevolution.com. I'm also available on Facebook at Urban Kitchen Revolution, as well as Twitter at James Hudson UKR. Join me next time when we take this bechamel sauce and turn it into one of the classic derivatives, a Mornay, which will be a real quick, easy video. It's really only adding some cheese to this, and then transition from that into the episode after that into a nice, luscious mac and cheese, 2 different ways, both northern and southern style. Again, thanks you for joining me. I'm Chef James Hudson. Join the revolution. Bye.